Today, answers matter more than ever before. That's why IBM is helping businesses manage customer questions with Watson Assistant. It's conversational AI designed to work for any industry. Let's put smart to work. Visit IBM.com/Watson Assistant.
Empire.
Welcome back to another episode of the Football Jones podcast. I am Mike Jones. Read me at usatoday.com. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @ByMikeJones. And I'm happy to be joined again by my buddy John Keim. You know him from the John Keim Report. Insider for all things Redskins. Does it better than anybody in the league. Cakes, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's been a while since I've had to cover a game. It's relaxing.
Yeah.
As much as this job can be relaxing, it's relaxing.
Right, exactly. You know, it's like you have an off season, but you don't really have an off season. And obviously for you, you're having to monitor a lot because of this new regime getting set up. And that's why I wanted to talk to you, because I feel like obviously the number one pick, we feel like Joe Burrow is going to be there, but I feel like the Redskins are in a really good position to do a number of things to help themselves, and this could be pretty intriguing. So that coupled with just Ron Rivera stuff, coupled with Josh Norman being gone, Jordan Reed, Adrian Peterson, their futures in question, I felt like this is the perfect time for us to huddle back up again. So let's get to it. What have you thought so far? We talked right when they hired Rivera. But as you're seeing these building blocks being put in place with this coaching staff and the way they're going about things and what they want to accomplish heading towards the draft, what have you learned so far?
I think there's a strong desire to make sure that he sets it's easy to say set the foundation, right? And that's what every coach wants to do. But I think he's very cognizant of that, maybe even more so than when he was at Carolina. I think that's one of the things coming into his second job that you learn, that what are the things that are absolutely necessary. I know he talks a lot to guys like Andy Reid before taking this job, and that's one of the lessons I think that was imparted to him is make sure you really, whatever you're going to do it right now. So you see some things that may or may not make a difference, like they remove the ping pong table. Well, I've talked to guys like that doesn't make any difference, but in his mind, it symbolizes a level of change within that organization. So I think what you're going to see some moves like, getting rid of Josh Norman, I wouldn't put in there because it was really a money thing. But I think like what I do take from some things like, if you haven't been, this is a place that's had a lot of injuries. If you're not durable and available, are they going to keep you around like the old regime clearly was, And so I think there's that desire to get that. And the funny thing is, Mike, that when you talk to some people over there, like some of the coach, whatever, there's a definite energy in the building with those guys. The guys who come in from outside and they're excited about what they're doing. They feel like they have a chance to build. They like the roster. But then there's another part in that building that is like, what does this mean for us? And I think, because I think they're still not sure what's their future there. So it's kind of for some people, it's an anxious time. And for other people there, I think it's on the other end, which is an exciting time.
Okay. So, his coaching staff is put together. He's got a guy like Jack Del Rio, very well proven. Then Scott Turner, who's not really well proven, but they have Randy Jordan still working with the running backs, a guy that's got a lot of experience. It feels like he's got a mix there. But what do you think? Ken Zampese, I feel like he's a good guy to have with Dwayne Haskins. I talked to Carson Palmer about him when the number one pick, when Cleveland, had the number one pick. And there was a chance that Sam Darnold would be the guy. And, Carson Palmer raved about Zampese as a quarterback tutor. And I feel like that's good for Haskins. But what do you think about Scott Turner being so unproven as an OC, as a guy to help develop Haskins?
I'll talk about Scott first, but I do want to talk about Zampese for a second too. But I think with Scott Turner, Rivera is very, very familiar with him because he was in that building as a quality controller, either offensive assistant or quality control coach when he first started in the league. And so Rivera has seen him rise up as a coach. And he's got the bloodlines because of Norv Turner, of course, his dad. And he came back, he did a good job A couple of years ago, they were 6-2.
Mm-hmm.
Cam Newton was playing well. So that was Scott Turner, quarterback's coach. And obviously Cam Newton playing well himself, but credit also goes to Scott and then Norv Turner as the offensive coordinator. And my understanding is that Norv would kind of do things to maybe would give him more freedom to have input into certain decisions and the game plan and all that to help develop him more. And so I think it's a natural next step. Nobody really knows where it's going to go, but I do think that he's got the bloodlines, and I think Rivera knows him well, which I think is important to him. But I also think, again, the key is he saw him develop as a coach. So you kind of believe that, well, if he's trusting him here, and I do think that there's we don't know what he's going to do, but I think there's a level of optimism because this guy has seen him rise. And so I think the other part with that too, I think one of the things that Scott Turner does that helps Haskins is a lot of play action. They love the play action game and over the middle. I think that will help Haskins once he gets to know that offense. The hard part is it's a digit-based offense versus the language of the West Coast offense. So Haskins is going to have to learn a whole new language. And so I'll be curious to see how that goes. Then that's when I'm going to get back to Zampese. Because the one thing, I talked to Jason Campbell for my podcast several weeks ago about that, because he had him, he played for Zampese for 1 year, and what was your experience? And he said, well, early on, you're just kind of getting to know each other. He said you noticed that he was very personable as he got to know more. So he felt like you could develop a good working relationship. But what he really thought in terms of coach quarterback was the details, and that he was really good with the details of the protection game. And that's something where I think that he said that will help Haskins a lot. So I personally think that Zampese may be the most important hire on that offensive staff because he's going to work more closely with Dwayne Haskins. So I think the development for Haskins will come as much from what Zampese does as I think with Scott Turner. And lastly with that, I was talking to somebody else who felt like there were so many guys with quarterback experience in that building last year that it was almost too much. There were almost too many guys telling Haskins, do this, we'll do this, do this. And they all brought something different to the table. And at first you think, oh, there's all this knowledge. But sometimes you have too much and you have too many people in your ear with that stuff. And that's not going to be the case this year.
Okay, good. I did listen to that episode with Jason Campbell. If you guys have not, go over to John Keim Report, look for that episode, because I felt like you're exactly right. That Campbell did a really good job of painting the picture of what Zampese does as a coach. That is good. Now, do you know, this number-based offense, is that at all similar to the way that they called plays at Ohio State, or is it completely foreign to Haskins?
I don't think it is. That's a good question, Mike. And I know that's something I'd have to ask Haskins. I don't believe it is. So it is a different one. But when you talk to these quarterbacks, most of them will say that the West Coast one is the hardest one to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was able to eventually get that. There are going to be some things that carry over conceptually, but I think it will take a lot of studying and a lot of extra work to get caught up on this. And I think the hard part is you're in your second year, you finally started to get comfortable with this offense, and now you're back having to do it again. But I don't know that I don't think it was the same thing he had there. Like I said, what I know is that the West Coast, because it's such a long, you wrote a story talking to Dwayne about that last summer where you had him repeat a play and how many words it was. And it's not just like what Haskins would even say. It wasn't so much just memorizing all that. It was also then understanding each thing, and that way you can communicate it to that person in the huddle. So he felt like when he started to improve is when he can look in the huddle and tell the receivers, he'd look at the receivers during their part and communicate it directly to them. And he can look at the offensive line and communicate directly to them their part. That's when he felt like he started to get better with things. And you saw before that point there was confusion over everything. But so I think what you have to hope if you're the Redskins is that he learned a lesson in how long it takes to pick up an offense and the things you need to do to help you pick it up.
The big questions I feel like for Haskins outside of his own development is he going to have his Pro Bowl left tackle and very talented but oft injured tight end on the field coming forward? What have you been able to gather from the Trent Williams, Jordan Reed fronts? I have not gotten a clear picture myself on where things stand with Trent. So what can you share on those communications, those prospects?
It's been hard to get a clear picture on that one, hasn't it? It's been hard. So what we know is that he has talked to Rivera. So that's a first step. What I also know from I had a conversation with Trent in December, and at that time I provided a hypothetical. What if Bruce Allen is gone? Would you want to come back in that scenario?
Right.
And he kind of thought about it. He goes, well, I wouldn't say no to a return. But he said, we're still far apart on some other issues.
Right.
Well, that's money, right? So unless they're going to guarantee his contract, I don't know that they're going to be able to work it out, because I think that's ultimately either guarantee the money this year, which the 12.5 is not guaranteed, or give him an extension in which you give him guaranteed money. That's how I think, if you really want to work it out, I think but I think it's a good step from the Redskins side, that because I do believe it probably shows that Rivera is in charge, because I think if Dan Snyder really didn't want him here after trashing his organization, then I don't know that Rivera would be reaching out to him.
Right.
And so I kind of took like that means that, and Rivera clearly wants to establish that O-line. The line is a lot better with Trent Williams in there. People in that building who were upset with him for some of the stuff he said, because they felt like he trashed the organization and wouldn't name names. There were some people who were upset about that, but none of them were saying, and you know how this works, Mike. They're done with you. They're going to start trashing you more on the side, right?
Exactly.
You weren't really hearing that to that degree. I think it was like, well, yeah, blah, blah, yeah, it's this, it's that, and but anybody who thinks he can't play, just put on the tape. The guy can play. So they know that. So I know they know he can help them. And so I think where it stands, I still think that money is going to be the deciding factor here. Gotcha. And then as far as Jordan Reed goes, Ron Rivera said at an event in Charlotte on Saturday that he remains in the concussion protocol. Exactly. So I don't look at him as a guy. I don't view him as part of their futures. And he would save, I think it's like $8.5 million against the cap, off injured. If he's still in that protocol and it was a brutal hit that he took in August for the concussion. For those who don't remember that third preseason game, brutal hit going over the middle and never played. And I think it's 7 documented concussions since he started playing at Florida. You get it. If you bring him back, you run the risk of a guy that you think can be really good for you getting a concussion and not being available for a long time. So I don't see him coming back. They have a need at tight end. Vernon Davis already retired. They have talked to Greg Olson. You hear stuff about them being interested in receivers and tight ends to surround Dwayne Haskins with more talent. So I think once they get that concussion stuff resolved, whether it's injury settlement, whatever, that I would think they would move on. That's the expectation.
My one other question about Trent that I'm wondering is, okay, even if they do offer to guarantee that money, he's 31, going to be 32. Right. Is he willing to go through another rebuild when he knows that the clock is ticking? Because I know that Josh Norman has a lot of respect for Ron Rivera, but at the same time, these guys don't have time to go 3-4 more years for they're ready to actually really contend. And when I talked to Trent, he was the same way about like, well, I won't say no, but I also kind of wondered in his mind, if he had gotten wind that some teams that are ready to contend right now have interest, would you really be beholden to want to stay here when you could go somewhere else and compete? Even just like Laramie Tunsil did in Houston, they didn't make all the way, but at least they got to the playoffs and won a game in the playoffs, which is something Trent has never experienced.
Well, and I think the other part of that too, Mike, is that this is now, it's a different organization than the one that Trent left, or than when he was here last, because it's a new coaching staff. It's not a completely new front office. There's still a lot of familiar faces. I mean, the strength and conditioning coaches are still there. Malcolm Black and Doug Williams still there. So people he's dealt with, he's tight with Alex Santos, still there. So they're the offensive linemen all are there. So it's not like he would be stepping in, he's coming back something foreign, but maybe you look at that and say, well, maybe it's a time for a break for him if he wanted to go. But I also think that it was always more about the guys in the locker room than it certainly was about the coaches. I think so. The fact that those guys are there gives me some pause that maybe he'd go elsewhere, just because those are his guys. But I think to your point, I also wonder that when he clearly was done with this place. So once you make that decision mentally that you're ready to move on, how hard is it to then go back and say, oh, well, this is really where I wanted to be? And, I would just think that he spent months having moved on. So there's got to be a part of him that might be looking forward to that. But it's still, having said that, it's still their control, because he does have 1 year left. So, right. Is he really going to risk sitting out second season?
Yeah.
But I also, having said that, which is a phrase I'm using a lot, but if you're Rivera and he comes to you and says, I still want to get out of here, then if I'm Ron Rivera, I'm going to look to trade him.
Yeah.
Because you can't, why would you want to carry this into training camp and have to woo this guy? Like, well, you don't want to be here, then that's okay. We're going to move on and get a second round pick or whatever you can for him. This is a good offensive tackle draft, high in the draft, it seems. I don't know that the depth is there. I think, but if you want a sure thing, Trent's the sure thing.
Right. So obviously Josh Norman, mentioned him. That wasn't really a surprise. I know that there was a chance that he could restructure, but really I felt like, despite, his respect for Ron Rivera, as soon as they hired him, I asked him what he thought about him, and he had nothing but good things to say about him. But that doesn't mean that you wanted to stay here. So I felt like, a lot of respect, but he's a win now mode. What did you make of that?
He is. And I also think that, I don't know that it was just necessarily like his decision. I mean, there were people in that organization who were ready to move on from him last year.
Right.
Because they just didn't feel like, and it wasn't that he was a bad player, it's that the play didn't match the contract and the cap hit. And the problem with, as you know, with this organization is, you look at the big money guys the last couple of years, and you look at the production compared to other teams' big money guys and their production, and it never was there, whether it was injuries or in Josh's case, it was going to be hard for him to live up to that contract, because you're paying a guy who had an incredible year in 2015, almost the NFL Defensive Player of the Year. It's hard to expect a couple of touchdown pick sixes, every year, but the play wasn't necessarily matching that. He was benched late in the year, different staff, whatever. So I think it was a good move for both sides to start over. I think that was one thing I wondered. It's funny, because when all this was going on with Josh late in the year and he was benched, he knew it didn't serve him any purpose to sit there and rip the organization.
Right.
He also knew at that time, because I remember even saying to him, like, it could be your former coach is the guy here. And he's like, exactly. In other words, like, why would I want to burn that bridge automatically and just torch this place and just like make it so that way somebody doesn't want me around?
Right.
So Josh can still play, and Josh can go play, and he does want to win, and I don't blame him. And then I think some guys just get, years ago, Champ Bailey, when he got in that situation here, they had all these defensive coordinator changes his first like 4 or 5 years here. And then Joe Gibbs comes in, but it didn't change Champ's mind about wanting to stay. He was just done with all that took place here, and it had beaten him down. So it's like, you just want to get out. If you see this change, I hope it works for them, but I want to get out. And I think some people get to that point as well. And I wonder more so about Trent than with Josh. But I do think, Josh clearly made it known that he came here thinking they could build something as a winner. and it never happened. But I do think it was it's a good parting of the ways for both sides.
Yeah, that's a very good point you make there, and a very good analogy to that situation there. Okay, so next week is the Combine. There's going to be a lot of intrigue because the Redskins have the number 2 pick.
Right.
Obviously, we feel like Joe Burrow is going to go to Cincinnati. The Redskins, there's been talk to Chase Young, but do you see a scenario where a team jumps up to number 2 and the Redskins move down and take a bounty of picks to help continue to build this thing? And I guess depending on who it is, if they jump up to number 2, the Redskins could still have a chance for Chase Young if they don't move back too far. What do you see happening with this team and this draft and their needs? Because like you said, they need wide receivers. They could need a left tackle. We don't know about Brendan Sheriff yet. They need cornerbacks. They need a whole lot so they can help themselves in a number of ways.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple keys here. First of all, Jack Del Rio, Ron Rivera and Jack Del Rio are, they're pairing up here, defensive coordinator, head coach, defensive-minded guys. Obviously, Del Rio is, but Rivera is too. In Carolina, when Del Rio was there years ago, he was there when they took Julius Peppers.
Right.
He went to Denver. They had just drafted Von Miller. He's in Oakland. They take Khalil Mack. So they know what a guy like who has Chase Young's skill set can provide a defense. And all you have to do is look at San Francisco with Nick Bosa and what he added to that defense. And the improvement they made wasn't just because of Bosa, but my God, he made a big difference.
Right.
And, so I think they see all that, and you look at that and like, if you can get an impact guy at that spot, you take him. So my sense would be that I would still, at this point, think they're going to take him. But what we don't know yet is, what if they rate Isaiah Simmons and Jeffrey Okudah at a similar point with Chase Young as far as their potential impact? Does that change things for them? Because then you're looking at, well, if you trade back down to 5 with Miami, quarterback goes number 2, and then would you get one of those guys at 5? And I don't know if you would or not, because I think they would. I think the Giants may go O-line, but so one of those guys might be there. You say, like, we could trade back and you get Isaiah Simmons and he can still make this big impact for us as a weak side linebacker in the new 4-3 they're running. Then it's like, okay, then I could see that. Recent history shows that trading back and getting more picks isn't always a good thing. Now, the problem with that history is that too much of it is with the Browns. So
right.
They've traded back a couple times. It never works out because they're the Browns. They were the Browns, and it just didn't work out. But there are other examples too where teams either stayed put. The Niners stayed put last year, but the difference last year is nobody was trading up to the number 2 pick once Kyler Murray went to number 1. So I think the Redskins are in a unique spot that there's a potential elite pass rusher there, but there's also quarterbacks that teams really like. They may want to go up and get. And so it puts you in a weird position, because ordinarily it's like you take Chase Young and you don't think twice. But what if the Dolphins offered a couple first rounders this year and a first rounder next year? So, would you how much do you look at that? You have to look at that.
Yeah.
But I just go back to their history and their history with those pass rushers and what it's meant for those teams, that it's like it would be really hard for me to see them passing up on Chase Young just to get more picks, because they do have a good base of young talent. What they also need are guys who could develop into elite level players. And I think Young has that possibility. But again, I think the one thing we don't know, Mike, is how do they rate him compared to Okudah? And I'd say you have to have 2 or 3 guys that you're interested in at number 5. If Okudah, Simmons, and whoever else is there, then you say, okay, then maybe you make the move. But then, of course, what do you do in free agency? Do you sign James Bradbury and get another corner in here? And maybe you don't feel like you need to go get that corner right now, because when you have a chance to get that pass rusher, my God, how do you pass him up?
Now, what do you think happens with Ryan Kerrigan? I mean, you obviously have Montez Sweat, who you've invested in, Ryan Kerrigan on the other side. Do you see him still as part of the picture?
I do think my guess, and I feel like this is a fairly educated guess, would be that they give him an extension and lower his cap number this year. Because his cap number is like, I want to say it's like 11.5 million this year. So you can't keep, if you draft Chase Young, you can't keep Ryan Kerrigan at that cap number. And he's I think he's 31. So I think that's how old he is. But you can't, if you have Chase Young and Montez Sweat, those are your ends.
Right.
So you're going to put Kerrigan in a backup role, making that, accounting for that. I think that'd be awfully difficult. But I had a few people in the last several months who their prediction was, listen, Dan loves him. He'll never go anywhere else. And they're going to extend him. Just watch. So I'm at that point now. And then you can put him into a Chris Long type role, like you have with the Patriots or with the Eagles, where it's like you're a situational guy, but you still got a role, and it's a good role for you. I think he could be really good in that spot. That's how I see it. And again, I go back to it's Rivera and Del Rio. They understand the desire and need to have multiple pass rushers. And Nick Bosa came on to San Francisco, but so did Dee Ford.
Right.
So could they look at it like that? And I think the other factor too in this is, what if, unless they're 100% sure they're taking Chase Young, to me there'd be no benefit to getting rid of a guy like Kerrigan. Because what if at the last second the Dolphins make you this incredible offer and he's like, God, we've got to take this. Then you got rid of Kerrigan, and now are you stuck? So I see it being that my guess would be he ends up signing an extension.
Gotcha. Now, my other question is, would he be okay with that kind of reduced role? I mean, obviously we know he's been durable. Last year was the first time he's ever missed playing time. When Luke Kuechly retired, he was one of the guys I talked to, and he was very much still loves playing football, feels great, feels like he's got a lot of gas left in the tank. But being a guy who's just a situational guy after being a full-time guy since 2011, I think?
2011. Yeah. And I think it depends on how they view that role. And it's like, if you're talking a couple plays, like only a handful of plays, well, I think that'd be hard for him. But if you're talking like you're using that sub package a lot and you're going to rotate guys in and you're still getting X number of snaps, I think it's important for him I think my sense has always been, Mike, that he wants to stay here. I think he likes it here. I think he's one of those guys that feels like he's put in a lot of time here and invested a lot of time and energy trying to get this franchise right, that if you see a chance for it to finally turn, he doesn't want to leave. Okay. I think in the right, but I also would think, and I think you bring up a good point, is I think Rivera and those guys would have to sell like, listen, this is how we'd envision it for you. And he's got to be okay with that. But I do think that that's a good spot for him. And I think if he's going to go to a good team, my guess is that's the kind of role he would find for other teams. So why not just stay here? And again, I think it means something to him to stay here, and I think he does want to be here if and when it turns around.
Okay, that makes sense. It's going to be interesting to see how this draft plays out, how the free agency plays out, because we haven't seen Ron Rivera as a top personnel guy. We haven't seen Kyle Smith as the lead guy. Obviously, anybody who's talked to him knows he's a sharp guy. They've done well drafting. He knows college talent. The pro side has been where the Redskins have struggled projecting guys into their system. So, I don't know what to make of their offseason. This is like the first time in forever that I just really don't know what to make of, their tendencies and how they're going to do it. So it's going to be intriguing to me.
I agree. And I think that's the one thing too with Rivera is like, this is a different spot for him. So I think it can be, I'll be curious to see how, because he's in charge, we've seen times where coaches are in charge and they make coaches moves. They don't care about X, Y, or Z because they just want the player. We saw that years ago, the Redskins traded like a second-round pick for Jason Taylor at the end of his career because they had a desperate need for a defensive end. They gave up a third-round pick for T.J. Duckett at the end of his career because they had a desperate need for someone at that spot. but it was Joe Gibbs's time he was making those decisions. We haven't seen that here since then. So I'll be curious to see and how much he allows others to tell him, you can't do that. You got to consider this. And he always talks about things being a collaborative effort. So, I don't know how he's going to handle that because it is a new spot for him. He always had Marty Herney in Carolina or Gettleman or whatever. So, there was a little bit more of an equal standing, I guess I would say. So, but they have the money to spend, Mike. And when all these cuts are finalized, when they make all these moves, they could have close to $70 million in cap space. That's the most they've had in a while. Yeah. So I do think they're going to be active with some guys. I would expect them to go after a tight end. I would expect them to try and find a receiver because they want to surround Haskins with as much talent as possible. And I think those are two spots that they definitely need to improve. And so I think, and that's why letting Paul Richardson go, my understanding was that they wanted to find a 1A or 1B to McLaurin's 1A. Right. And so it's going to be hard for agency to find that, but I think they want to look for that. So I think there will be I think they will be active there. But I think those are some of the spots. And then also re-signing their own guys, Brandon Sheriff, Eric Flowers, working it out with Trent Williams. I think those are as big if they can keep Trent Williams, that's like a landing a big time guy in free agency for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
and one thing when you were talking about, him making decisions, will he listen to other people? One thing that at the Super Bowl, I talked to several of his former players, and they said one of the best things about Rivera is that he delegates to his assistants. He trusts people's input, and they actually felt like he's a great motivational guy, a great leader, and that when he dabbled and got too heavily involved in X and O's, they felt like it was too much, but they felt like the vision, the leadership, the delegation. So they felt like he probably would be okay pulling the trigger on, tough decisions with personnel just because of the fact that he does really believe in trusting his people, receiving their input and acting off of that.
I think that's a good point. I'd heard good things from people who worked with him in Carolina about that, and not people who are here now. He brings up the word collaborative a lot. So it does seem like that's how it's going to go, because if you ask him, well, who's making the decisions on this stuff? I don't know you're going to get a great answer other than using the word collaborative. Mm-hmm. And so I think he's going to trust, like you're right about Kyle Smith. Now, this is a new role for Kyle Smith, being in charge of, all of personnel, but he is somebody who has good opinions and I don't think is afraid to share those without being standoffish or, he strikes me as a very much a chain of command type guy. You ask for my opinion, here it is. Well, you know what, Kyle, this is what I want to do. Okay, then we'll go get this done. You know what I mean? So I think, not as he's a pushover, but I just think that I think he would work well with a guy like Rivera. But it isn't, and then Rob Rogers, I've always heard he's a good negotiator. People respect him. They feel like he's straightforward. So I think that helps, to go get it done. So, but I wonder about the budget and because when you are a coach, you tend to look at things differently. But I think that's where it's good to have a guy like a Rob Rogers, an experienced guy who has worked with him, who can tell him, Ron, that's a crazy figure to give this guy. Do you know what I mean? This is the homework. This is what I laid out. And he can say, okay, you're right. So that's important to have that guy, in that office with you.
Yep, exactly. Well, Cakes, I appreciate your input. It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out because, if they take Chase Young at number 2, great for them. If they decide to move, they have a chance to really impact and change the complexion of this whole draft.
They do.
So it'll be interesting.
And, I'm sorry, the one more thing on that too. My thing with them would be if you do trade, get a first-round pick for next year, mainly because if they clearly need to see more from Dwayne Haskins. Mm-hmm. So if you can get another pick next year and you find at the end of next year that Haskins isn't your guy, well, now maybe you have some ammo to go get somebody. And if Haskins is your guy, then you're not picking very high.
Right.
Because it probably means that he's done pretty well. Yeah. And or at least he's done well enough where you're around 500. But if he's not your guy, you could be picking around that top 10 spot. And if you have an extra first round pick, maybe you can move up and get one of the guys next year. I don't know, but I would, that's my own thing. Like I would keep an eye on that if I'm them.
Yeah. Another good point. All right, Cakes, well, tell everybody where they can find you.
All right, well, on Twitter at John_Keim, on ESPN.com. Of course, I have to mention that one. And then the John Keim Report. So those are the spots you can find. And those are on, just like with your podcast, on all various platforms.
Yep, exactly. All right, Cakes, well, thanks so much, and I will see you soon.
All right, Jonesy.